All right, welcome to OLC 40. This is term 2A, class 3, and we're going to be working on assignment number 2 and 3 types of verbs. I am Jillian Percy. Here is our contact information. As always, if you need to send in student work, send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. Please always include your full name, course name, assignment number and name. And if an assignment asks you for both a rough and a good copy, please label which is which and include them both in the same email. They often have different marking schemes, so I need to see them both. If you have a question for me about an assignment, email me at jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. If you have a question while I'm on air, 1-800-465-7144. And if you are trying to reach me on Facebook, capital G, capital P, ERCY space, capital W, AHSA. And if you're looking to rewatch an old recording, it is on YouTube at G Percy Wassa, and there should be a term 2A playlist that you would click on. If you kind of get ahead of where we are, because we're right at the very beginning, it's fine to go ahead and take a look at some of the other playlists. I have a playlist from term 1A that would also walk you through all the assignments if you start working ahead. All right. It's just a quick review so kind of remember where we were yesterday. We were talking about verbs in predicates and that there are 3 main types of verbs. There are action verbs, state of being verbs, and helping verbs. The first type of verb describes what someone's doing, their actions. That's something we always think of for verbs. The second type describes their state of being, usually the verb to be, like be, am, is, are, was, were. And then the third type helps another verb, and that creates a verb phrase like, I am buying some groceries. And am and buying both count as verbs. He has been out all night. Again, has and been both work as verbs there. Okay, so look at the verb in the sentence and decide what type of verb it is. He chopped the wood. I've underlined the verbs. Is chopped an action, a state of being, or is it a helping verb? If you look at it, you can see that it is an action. I'm just going to underline because underlining comes up really quick. I want to highlight, but it doesn't always work as well. My new boyfriend bought me a present, and bought is our verb. Is that an action, a state of being, or helping? In this case, it is an action. Okay. The cat is black. Now, that's definitely not an action, right? The cat's not doing anything. It is a state of being. It can't be a helping because helping has to have 2 verbs there. Normally, one helping and one action. The old tree is falling down quickly. So in this case, falling is an action and is a helping verb. So this actually has 2 types of verbs in one sentence, which is pretty common, really. The next door neighbors might come over for coffee. So come is an action verb in that sense, like someone's coming, they're walking towards you, that idea. Might, I don't remember if we've discussed it yet, but it's a special type of verb called a modal verb. And it's an action that might or might not happen, right? There's a possibility of it happening. In this case, it's a helping verb because it's modifying what type of action? The toy could arrive in the mail today. So arrive is definitely our action and could. Could is another one of those tricky modal verbs that acts as a helping verb to modify the main verb. Okay. Babies will cry when hungry. So cry right away, you notice that. That's your action. But will is a helping verb, right? In this case, it often indicates like a future tense. Canada is a democracy. So there's no action. There is a state of being. There's no helping verb because it needs 2 verbs to be a helping verb. The deer was brown with white spots. Okay, well, that's not an action. It is a state of being. I find state of being are pretty common, but we kind of are so used to thinking of actions that we don't always notice that they're there. Okay, so this is just kind of a chart. One of the weird things in English, and I don't know why, the verb to be, hang on, which is the infinitive form, kind of like a generic form, For some reason in English, it breaks into all these different words, and I don't know why. So with I, it becomes am. With the word you, it becomes are. With he, she, or it becomes is. And then in its plural form, in the present, it becomes are. Past tense, singular, was or were if it's a plural, or were for you. I don't know why it becomes that, but it just does. Um, and then future tense is like will be. There are some other tenses that we'll see later. Don't think we've talked about them yet in this class. And they're things like have been, is being, was being, has been, had been, am being, that one we've already got, or were being. And these ones often will show like something's happening in the future, or it happened in the past, or it's a continuous action, that kind of thing. Again, it's mostly important that just that you know that it exists. So when you're looking for verbs in your sentence or you're writing verbs, you know what they are. Okay. State of being verbs describe the subject, their state, or rename the subject. That's the one we don't talk about. So for example, I am hungry. Hungry is describing what the person is like. But I could also say, I am the teacher. Now, when we're saying rename, we don't mean like, oh, they've decided to become, they're no longer Jill, now they're Jackie. It means it's giving them the alternate name. Their profession is a type of name. She was beautiful. So beautiful is describing the girl here. She is the baby in the family. So that just means she's the youngest. And again, the baby becomes, in a sense, another name for her. It is windy today. Windy describes the it, which is probably describing the day. I don't have an it over here, but anyways, they are the new nurses. So they are given the name of the new nurses. We were lost. That's describing their condition. The we is lost. We are driftwood on the ocean. Ooh, that's very poetic. Probably sounds like it's a a metaphor from some sort of poem. They are eager to learn. So the they is eager. I don't have a they here either. She is the auto mechanic. Again, they've renamed her. You are the boss. Use other name as boss. We are bricks in the wall. And if you're old like me, you might recognize that from a very famous song. So these ones both work. Okay. Other state of being verbs are things like seem, become, or get and appear. Again, it's not super important that you know that it's just one of those funny things where sometimes they're hard to recognize because they're not an action. Hang on. All right. Okay. I was trying to set this up so I could see people, but I can't seem to make that happen. I think I need a certain number before I can do that. I apologize. Um, okay, so we've got you seem upset. She will become a graduate in June. It gets cold in winter. The dog appears angry. Some verbs can act as both action verbs and SOB verbs. Look, taste, feel, and smell. She looks tired. It tastes rotten. He feels hot. It smells spicy. And here's the difference, right? He feels hot. Hot is just acting to describe, feels is describing his condition of being hot. But if I said the baby felt the warm blanket, in that case, feeling is an action. It smells spicy. Here, smells is just telling you that the condition of it is spicy. But if I said I can smell the wood burning, then I'm actually performing the action of smelling. So that's what we're talking about, where sometimes it could be one or it could be the other. And again, mostly just important so you know why it can be confusing sometimes. All right. Helping or auxiliary verbs. These verbs work alongside action verbs and they create what's called a verb phrase. For example, I have washed the dishes. Have and washed are both verbs. Have is the auxiliary, washed is the main action verb. There's these four are like the main helping verbs you're going to see over and over again in English. Do, which can translate as do, did, doing, does, or done. Have, which can stay as have or can be has or had. Will, which stays as will. And be, which we already looked at. So some more examples would be things like I am done cooking supper. So am done, am is your helper, and done is your action. I had finished my homework. Had is your helper, and finished is your action. I will leave in an hour. Will is your helping, and leaving is your action. Sometimes helping verbs are used to show special verb tenses. These are sometimes called modal verbs, and they help show whether an action is possible, probable, a need, or an obligation, like you've promised to do it. And some examples of these verbs are can, could, may, might, must, shall, should, would, ought to, had better, used to, need, and dare. And these are funny verbs. Like they don't even sound like verbs to me, but they're working together usually with an action verb. So they're a special type of helping verb. Like I did clean my room. Did is the modal, clean is your action. Mom needs to take her medicine. Needs is your modal, to take is your infinitive form of the verb. She has finished. Has is your modal. Oh, actually, this one, mm, that one is not a modal. I'm going to take that one off there. Sorry, I used to be something else. Your dad could take you to the hockey game. So could is your modal, take is your action. We should cook the hot dogs soon. Should is your modal, cook is your action. They might drop by for a visit later. Might is your modal and drop is your action. In these cases, like most times you're describing an action has occurred, will occur, or is occurring. These ones are all funny ones where it's like it might occur, it could occur, it would be good if it occurred. So they're kind of in a funny state, like where people are speculating, I guess. Okay, can you find the verb phrase in the sentence? Again, you always look in English for the subject, and normally the verb phrase is right after or shortly after the subject. So she is our subject and is beautiful is our verb phrase. The doctor is our subject and is saving is our verb phrase. Her life is the object. It doesn't count as part of the verb. The nurse is our subject, cleaned her wounds, and that's our verb. I had nightmares in my new house. Okay. Um, I would not call this a verb phrase because nightmares is not really an action. Nightmares are a thing. I could say something like, I had been having nightmares in my new house, and now it's a verb phrase, but nightmares is not an action. The snow is our subject, was falling all night long. Was falling is our verb phrase. And you can see English has got like a very common pattern for our simple sentences, right? That scary dog, that whole thing is our subject, might bite me. And might bite is our verb phrase. He is our subject, could have fallen. That whole three words, oops, hang on, didn't quite catch the C. Could have fallen is our verb phrase on the slippery sidewalk. Okay. That just kind of gives you the grammar that we're kind of using again. Mainly the reason we're doing the grammar is because I will talk about grammar when I'm giving you comments on your work. And it's not going to make any sense unless we kind of both agree on what the things mean. Um, for some reason, I don't know why they wrote it this way. They gave a blank and people filled in the blank. And sometimes people hand this in to me. This is just whoever wrote this being silly, right? So some people will write a wonderful, some people will write nasty words here. I don't mark this, don't hand this part in, okay? This is just explaining the assignment, okay? I'm gonna go right to the, yeah, no. I don't have, where am I? Perhaps you filled in the blank with a choice expletive, which is a fancy phrase for a not nice word. If you filled in the blank with an adjective like awesome or challenging, then this course is for you too. This course is for anyone who wants or needs to assess his or her literacy goals and then achieve them. Um, You may have thought, I don't have any literacy goals. And it's possible that you haven't really thought about it that way. You're not alone, right? What is a literacy goal? If you're reading this, you probably already can read. So what's the point? What other literacy goals are there? But one big thing is that expressing yourself through writing is also useful and important. So this course has been designed not only to meet the requirements of the Ontario curriculum, but also, and more importantly, to help you get the most out of everything you're interested in by improving upon your communication skills, especially writing skills, but we do focus on reading skills too. It will not only help you with your schoolwork, but will also help you in the real world. At least that's the intent, so hopefully. For this assignment, you're to write approximately 2/3 to 1 page about your family and your community. In other words, where you're from, what it was like growing up, your experience in school, and any other details you want to share about your life. The idea here is to get you to practice writing in sentences and in a paragraph format, but to do it with a topic that you're very familiar with. The more writing you do, the better you're going to get at expressing yourself in a variety of ways, as is required in this course. We do a lot of different writing, things like journal entries, informational paragraphs, news reports, opinion pieces. Maybe you've heard the phrase practice makes perfect. That's what we're aiming for with this course. You will need to write and submit both a rough copy of this and then a final copy for full marks. Again, you need to be careful with spelling, grammar, and punctuation in your final copy. And keep in mind that capital letters need to be used correctly. So the rough copy is worth 10 marks, and the final copy is worth another 10 marks. And altogether, you get a mark out of 20 here. Okay, so we don't really talk about this formally, but I'm going to introduce it now, is the writing process. Anytime you're writing anything that's going to be like longer than a grocery list, you want to spend a bit of time brainstorming or planning what you're going to write. It doesn't have to take long. It could be just like a 5 or 10 minute, maybe 15 minutes. If you really hate this part, set a timer on your phone for 5 minutes, and at 5 minutes, you get to stop no matter how far you got. You might want to think about major topics or areas of your life you want to discuss. Maybe there's specific stories or anecdotes you want to tell. For this assignment, which is our topic, is growing up in your community. So suggested areas or subtopics are things like your community, growing up, school experiences, and any other topics. Any other topics is because we have people of all different ages here. Maybe you want to mention other schooling you did, or moves you did, or marriage, or kids, or grandkids. You don't have to, but if those are things that have happened in your life and you want to, this is definitely acceptable and welcome in the essay, because it gives me a chance to know people, right? Other times, all I really see is a name on a page, and I don't really get a sense of who you are. This is my way kind of getting to know who you are. Um, if I was doing some brainstorming, I would usually set up a blank or a lined page with these topics in the four corners, and then I would jot down some ideas, and I'll show you in the next page. I did it kind of neatly with typing, mainly so you can read my writing, because my writing is kind of messy, especially on a computer screen. So here I've got my community, then I've got growing up, school experiences, and any other topics, and I gave you some examples. So I'm not going to do all of this, but just to give you an example, my home community is Windsor. Windsor is larger than T-Bay, but it's not as big as Winnipeg. It's an auto town next to Detroit, on the Detroit River. Lots of farms around. There's woods nearby, lots of pollution, lots of trades jobs like in the auto industry or tool and die. And I did my university here, there, and plus my teaching education there too. Growing up, when I was growing up, I was on the edge of town. It's since expanded, but at that point it was pretty woodsy. Um, there was woods, creeks, fields. My family is all here. I had a little brother. My older brother was there too. I might want to talk about my friends or any important events that happened in my life. So yours is not going to look the same as mine because we've lived very different lives. And any topics is whatever you want to share. Keep in mind, you don't have to share anything extra, right? If there's something you're uncomfortable with, don't feel like you have to share it. It's totally voluntary what you feel comfortable sharing. Now, sometimes people get mixed up and they think this brainstorming part is the rough draft. And so they'll hand me something like this in, but I can't give this really any marks because I'm looking for how you write sentences and how you write paragraphs, but that isn't what's happened here, so I can't really mark it. So brainstorming could be just like one word per thought. You might even have drawn a little doodle. It can be any length that is helpful to you. It does not need to be complete sentences. You don't really need to worry about spelling, grammar, or punctuation, but it is also not handed in and it is not marked. Now, occasionally people hand it in because they just want me to see, and that's fine, but I don't give it a grade. Your rough draft must be in full sentences. It has to be in a paragraph format. In other words, not a list, but all joined together. It must be a certain length. In this case, they've said it has to be 2/3 to a full page. It is going to be handed in, and I will mark it. So that's the big difference between those two. And again, a visual example, here's my messy brainstorming from yesterday. And here's an example of a rough draft based on this, where you can see that I've written in sentences. So I feel like the grandfather teachings are important to live life. Bravery has been the most important one for me. I am not naturally very brave. I always want to hide away from hard things, but many of the best events in my life have happened because I was brave. And I did things even when it was really hard for me, like moving away from home. Now, if you weren't here yesterday, you may have already noticed there are spelling mistakes and there are punctuation mistakes. And I'm not going to stress out too much about them in my rough draft because I know I have time to fix them later on in my good copy. Okay. So we've said that it has to be a paragraph, but what exactly do I mean by that? A paragraph is a group of sentences that have a common theme or topic, and they often range from about 4 to 8 sentences in length in school. It could be different if you're writing a novel or, writing a research paper at college or something. Writers can show a new paragraph has started in two possible ways: by leaving a space between one paragraph and the next, or by putting an indent at the beginning of each paragraph. And I'm going to show you what I mean in a second. The first one, where you leave a space, is way more common these days, especially on computers, because it's really obvious whether you're looking at a desktop, a laptop, or a tiny little phone in your hand. The second one, where you leave an indent, is more common when people do handwriting. Either one is fine. They both tell me a new paragraph has started. So unless an assignment asks you to do it one way or the other, which I don't think it does, it doesn't matter. So here's an example. This one, you can see they've done the indent. See how they've just kind of put like 5 or 6 spaces and then they start writing. And then over here, they've done the space. So they write a little bit, leave their space, write another paragraph, leave a space. And you can see this is a lot more readable no matter what size it is. So this is really common. But again, it doesn't affect your marks either way, no matter which way you do it. Okay, here is a visual for a typical paragraph format. It's a really common way of teaching it these days, so you may have seen it before. And they call it the hamburger format. And the reason is most paragraphs, they want the top and the bottom to be somewhat similar. So the top is kind of introducing your main idea. And then the bottom, or the bottom half of your bun here, is kind of restating what the topic is, not in the exact same words, but in kind of similar format. And then the main body of the paragraph is all the juicy details, which they've shown here by, like, tomatoes and cheese and lettuce and hamburger. So if we break it apart, a paragraph looks like this. There will be a topic sentence that tells the reader the main idea or what the paragraph will be about. Then there's one supporting sentence or one major detail that relates to this main idea. Then there's a second sentence that does the same thing. And then a third. You might have 4 or 5, probably not more than that, or it'll get too long to read. And then you're going to have a concluding sentence that refers back to the top and kind of sums everything back up. Sometimes people summarize this format with the top bun is tell them what you're going to talk about. Then the middle is talk about it. And then the bottom is summarize what you talked about. Here's how it might look. The best way to make sure your assignment is in a paragraph format is simply plan it that way right from the beginning. And the topics used for brainstorming can be a good place to start. So here this little square is my paragraph, and then I've left a space, paragraph, space. So you might start with your community, leave a space, then talk about growing up, leave a space, talk about your school experiences, leave a space, and talk about what's happening now if you feel comfortable doing that. Okay. Hang on. Okay. Now, let's say you did your writing straight through. You've already kind of worked ahead and you've got a whole page. And now suddenly I'm talking about paragraphs. How do you go back and fix it? I would first of all take a pencil, not a pen. With a pencil, I can erase things. And then I would go through and start looking for where my topics seem to change to a new idea. The end of a paragraph would start with the last sentence of the topic you've been talking about. And then the new paragraph is starting your new topic. So you should put kind of like an L shape there to show where the new paragraph would begin. So here I've started my new paragraph. I had lots of great experiences growing up. We did a lot of hunting and camping. In the summer, my friends and I swam a lot. And there's the end of that paragraph right here. Now here, my new one has kind of started because here I'm beginning to talk about school, right? So always, if you didn't remember to do paragraphing as you wrote, look for where the topic changes. And then sometimes when you do that, I'm going to kind of pull this away so you can see, oh, wow, I've only got, 2 or 3 sentences on this first paragraph. I'm going to need to add some more ideas. It becomes more obvious when you split things into paragraph where you kind of haven't said enough details and where you can add some more. Okay. So here's an example of a paragraph that I wrote on a slightly different topic. So down the side, you can see the hamburger stuff, right? Here's my opening and closing, and there are my details. And then I color coded this so it would match up and you could see. In real life, I wouldn't separate it sentence by sentence. I would just kind of push all the sentences together. But I thought this was easier to read while we were talking about it for the first time. So my topic sentences, my favorite part of high school was always art class. And then my first detail explaining this is, it was such a nice change to be working with images rather than words. And my second detail is, my favorite teacher's classroom was like an explosion of color and crazy objects for us to draw. It was like walking into an antique store. And then my third detail is, we got to work with so many different mediums: oil pastels, chalk, charcoal, watercolors, and acrylics. It was so fun to explore them all. Now, you can see here, this is my third detail, but it took me 2 sentences to explain it, and that's fine. So if you've got, your 5 main ideas, but it takes you a couple sentences for each, that's absolutely great. Don't worry about that at all. My closing sentence, and again, it's got to echo my top. Art class seemed more like a place for fun than work, which is why I loved it so much. Now you can see I didn't say the exact same thing. Here I was talking about my favorite part, and here I'm talking about why I loved it. But they kind of have the same idea. That's how we're talking about. They kind of echo each other, or they're similar to each other. All right. Now, again, when I was talking about paragraph format, I wouldn't list them that way. I would just kind of run them together. So this is the exact same thing. I've put a little indent to start my paragraph. And if you don't do the indent, leave a space before you do the next paragraph. Okay. After the rough draft and before your revisions. So after you've done your one paragraph, I would write like a little rough draft for each paragraph. And I would leave a few spaces between the paragraphs in case I had extra sentences I wanted to add later, which I'm hoping you will. And then after I had all my rough paragraphs written, I would check to make sure, have I actually got 2/3 to a full page? And the reason this is important is every now and again, I'll have somebody hand me in 2 or 3 sentences instead of a full page. And I literally won't even mark that because there just isn't enough there for me to comment on. I just kind of send it back to them and say, please redo this. So please check your length. I don't mind if it's slightly shorter, but it should be pretty close to what's being asked, or I won't really take the time to mark it because it just doesn't give me enough of an example of what you're trying to do. Like if you only do 2 sentences, you're not going to be able to show me paragraphs. There just isn't enough there. So then I would either take a picture of it or photocopy it before I look at it, before I make any kind of changes. Now, you can hand that in to me. Or the other thing, and this is a big one, is sometimes when I'm making changes, I have my original to go back to. Sometimes you make a change and then you think about it and go like, no, I liked it better the first time. If you've got that copy of your rough copy, then you've got it to refer to. And remember, you're going to have to hand in that rough copy. So some people really scribble on your rough copy before you do your good draft, and I don't mind that, but this is a good way to make sure I've got a clean rough copy to read just in case, okay? All right. I'm going to go through several steps of revising. Generally, when you're doing this, if you've been writing a long time, it becomes kind of automatic. You just kind of do it all along. I'm kind of splitting it out into separate steps, which may make it look like it's going to take a really long time. But again, like we were talking before, you could set a timer for 10 minutes and just run through one revision and then go watch your favorite TV show and then do another type of revision. If you're really comfortable as a writer, you may find yourself automatically doing several steps at once. But I'm just going to talk about them one by one because I think that makes it more obvious what I'm expecting. So the first thing to do, this is the biggest priority when you're revising any of your writing, is always just check, does it make sense? Is it clear what you were trying to say? Or do you need to add some details or reword it a little bit? Sometimes when we're writing kind of quickly, we might skip some of the little words and it made sense at the time, but now you're looking back at it and going, I need to add a few things back in. Or sometimes we get really going and we write an extremely long sentence that seemed fine. And now when you're going back, it's a little bit confusing because it's so long. Second, you want to check your sentence structure. We've talked a little bit about sentences, I believe, and if not, we'll talk some more about them. The most common grammatical errors in any writing is either incomplete sentences, which means it doesn't have a subject and a verb, or run-on sentences where people have put like 2, 3, 4, and they just kind of kept on writing. Maybe they put a comma between the sentences, or maybe they wrote a bunch of like and thens, like first I went to the zoo, and then we went to the store, and then we went to the restaurant, and they just keep linking all the sentences together till you've got kind of like one big mega sentence. That's the other thing I really look for. And then finally, near the end, you can check for punctuation, capitalization, and spelling errors. Don't do that right away because if you're making a lot of changes, there's no point until you have everything written the way you really like it. Okay. Checking for sense. So here's an example of what I mean. When you're checking for sense, you're thinking about what's wrong, how can I fix it? You're looking for any missing words, words that might be used twice that you could improve on, or places where the meaning seems a little bit confused. So if my original says, my favorite spot was down by the beach where the rocks can sit on to watch the sunset. Okay, where or where? I'm confused. I'm not really sure what they're talking about. So I need to kind of fix that so it's more clear what I meant. My favorite spot was down by the beach near the rocks, period. The rocks are where I can sit to watch the sunset. Now that's super clear. Anybody reading that knows exactly what I mean. Art, well, I was never no good at it, never like it, never care about it. Here, this is kind of how I might talk to a friend, but in writing, it's a bit confusing. We've got a lot of negatives here. We haven't really explained it. So here's my revision for that. I was never good at art, but I never liked it or cared about it. So it's still got most of the same words, but I've just kind of tidied it up and made it a little more clear. We went biking the pit. They said it was okay. Well, who said it was okay? What pit? Um, Here we've got we went biking to the pit. I might even add it as we went biking to the sand pit. Our parents said it was okay. Now it could be instead you asked your brother and sister, or you asked Gookum, or maybe the school was doing a trip. So you do want to explain who the they is, because you may have a very clear memory, but I won't have that memory. So you have to explain things to me. Sentence structure. Again, I think we talked quite a bit about this already, but just kind of reviewing here. Understanding structure, sentence structure is a really major theme of this course. And a lot of us in school, they kind of got out of the habit of teaching grammar for a while, and they just told us, well, a sentence expresses a complete thought. But sometimes that isn't really helpful in knowing what to fix. Um, it is one part of the definition of a sentence, but there is a lot more to sentence structure than that. So a working definition of a basic or what we call a simple sentence is that it has to have three things. It must have a subject, which is your noun or pronoun. It must have a predicate, which is your verb and your connected thoughts, and it expresses a complete thought. Okay. The thing with the complete thought is sometimes what one person thinks is a complete thought doesn't seem that way to another person. So here we're kind of being a little more specific. And even the complete thought thing, we'll talk about that a little bit more later because they means being specific there. So here is some sample sentences, and we're going to look at them and see, do they have all three of those things? And if not, what part is missing? So if I have this sentence, hated school growing up, is there a subject? Well, no, because it doesn't tell me who. Now, if you're writing this to me, you may think, well, she knows it's me. And you're right, I do. But for the sake of good grammar, we've got to actually write the word I. So in this case, my subject is missing. My favorite part of Windsor. Okay. It's got a subject. I know we're talking about Windsor, but there's no predicate. I don't know what we're doing or describing. So it's not really a complete thought, and it really has no predicate. So it kind of fails on 2 points. I don't really understand what's happening at all in this sentence. Was wishing for a long time that things would be different. Now, this one seems so long, it seems like it would have to be a sentence. But again, if you're looking at the subject, who or what is doing the wishing? I don't know. Maybe it's I, or maybe it's my little brother, or maybe it's an entire town. I have to state it. I do have a predicate because I've got was wishing. And once I give it a subject, I'll have a complete thought. After all that happened, is there a subject? Do we know who or what is doing the action? No. Do we have a predicate? We don't even really have a predicate here. There happened isn't sort of, it is a verb, but it doesn't really explain a whole lot. We don't really have a complete thought. For this one, we're missing a whole bunch of things. It really just doesn't work on any level. And then we've got the most beautiful place with a river, rocks, and a lovely beach. Again, that's a nice long string of words, but is it a sentence? Is there a subject? Absolutely. In fact, the whole thing is a subject. What's the predicate? What's happening? I don't know. I could say I saw the most beautiful place with a river, rocks, and a lovely beach, or the most beautiful place is my home, which has a river, rocks, and a lovely beach. But it's missing a predicate. I don't really know what's happening. So I would need to explain a little bit more for that to make sense. Okay. I'm mostly just covering simple sentences here. I don't want to overwhelm you by giving you too much information, and compound and complex sentences. I could talk literally for an hour or two on each one of those, and I don't want to tackle that here. So the major issue I see for these first few assignments pretty typically is that students start writing a paragraph as one long sentence and they don't put any periods. So if you start a new topic or a new subject, or there's a new person, you may have started a new sentence without really realizing it. Because we're writing a lot of these paragraphs about ourselves, a good hint is to check on the word I. If you find yourself writing I this and I that, almost certainly you've begun a new sentence. The other common one for these is if you're talking about my family or we, those are good hints if they're coming up again and again that you may have started a new sentence and you may need to put a period before you go on. So here's an example. I did this as a run-on sentence because I think I see that more than anything. And even myself, I'm kind of prone to it. If I get writing, it's the easiest mistake in the world to make, right? Okay, so I'm just going to read it through and then we'll try and figure out how we need to fix it. I got to go to California. My trip to California was so much fun. I went with my cousin. I couldn't believe my parents let us go on the planes when we were only 12 years old. It was my favorite aunt, so maybe that was why they let us go. California was beautiful, but it was also really hot. There were orange trees in her backyard. We went to the beach and we got to swim in the ocean and we got all sunburnt and I bought some new clothes and we got to see the place where they make movies and we got to go see Disneyland. Now, if I was just talking to a friend, this is absolutely fine because my friend can look at my face, they can look at my nonverbal gestures. If they're confused, they can stop me and ask me some questions. But in writing, all we have are the words in the page. So we have to make sure our words are really, really clear. So now there are some other problems in this rough draft, but we're going to mostly tackle sentence structure here. I got to go to California. My trip to California was so much fun. I could leave that as is, or I could join them to make a more complicated sentence if I want to. I could say something like, when I got to go to California, comma, my trip was so much fun. Hang on a sec. Okay. So that would work. I went with my cousin. I don't really need to add anything to that. I couldn't believe my parents let us go on the plane when we were only 12 years old. That's fine too. It was my favorite aunt. Sorry. So maybe that is why they let us go. California was beautiful, but it was also really hot. That's totally fine sentence. There were orange trees in her backyard. Who is the her? I'm talking about my aunt, but it's not really clear in the sentence. I need to kind of fix that. Hang on a second, and I will do that. Sorry, friends, mini coughing fit here. Okay. We went to the beach. Who's we? Probably my aunt and me, my cousin. So I'm going to kind of stay that. My aunt and my cousin and I went to the beach and we got to swim in the ocean. And wait, okay, that's a lot of ands. I think I'm going to stop there. That's my end of my sentence there. I'm going to get rid of that and I'm going to start a new sentence. Now, I'm okay with the we there because I've already kind of explained who the we is in the previous sentence. We got all sunburnt and I bought some new clothes. Those aren't really connected ideas, so I'm going to stop that. We got all sunburnt on the beach, just to kind of explain. And here, this didn't happen at the same time, so I'm going to make that clear by saying later on, I bought some new clothes. And that's not really connected to going to the movies. So I'm going to, again, stop my sentence and go on to new things. Let me see here. I'm just going to start with we. I might change that later. We got to go see the place where they make movies, which is called Universal Studios. And then I'm going to start a new sentence. Oops, sorry. We also got to go see Disneyland. Now, I feel like I've kind of used the word we an awful lot. If I were to turn this into a better draft, I would probably go back and play with this a little bit. But at least now all my sentences are grammatical and it's clear what I'm talking about. Maybe a little bit simple, but it's clear at least. We are running a little bit out of time. Oh, 43. Okay. So punctuation review. For the sake of this particular assignment, unless you're really confident, I'm going to ask you to avoid semicolons and colons until we've had a chance to talk about them more. Interrogative or question sentences obviously end with a question mark. Imperative or exclamatory sentences end with an exclamation point. They're excited. We don't usually use them in academic writing, but they'd be totally fine in this essay. You're talking about your own life. Declarative, which is just a telling sentence, and imperative, which are commanding sentences like go do this, both end with periods. Most of the time, your sentences end in a period, like 99% of the time. These are the capitalization rules. This is a bit detailed, but I'm going to go through it because it is one of those things that helps make your writing more readable. First of all, the beginning of a name always has a capital letter. Also, the beginning of a sentence and the word I. If you remember even just these three ones, those are the biggest ones that I look for at this time of the course. As we go along, I start to expect more, but those are my three ones that I really, really look for right now, okay? You would also want to have capital letters on the name of months or days for titles like Mr., Mrs., Ms., or Doctor. For the name of street, like, oh, our building is on Front Street. For the names of businesses, like, oh, I'm going to Red Apple. The R would be capital, so would the A. For the title of a book or a movie or a game, for the names of places like towns, cities, reservations, provinces, states, countries, or continents, for the names of a body of water, such as the Atlantic Ocean or the Detroit River, for monuments or buildings that might have a specific name, like CN Tower or Massey Hall or Victoria Inn, for the names of airports, train stations, or bus stations. So I'm thinking like in Toronto, one of the airports is called Pearson Airport. And you would definitely say that because there's two airports in Toronto, and you wouldn't just say the Toronto airport because they could want you to go to Pearson, or maybe they want you to go to the other one, which is called the Billy Bishop Airport. So some places it's just the airport, but other places have a lot of airports. You got to make clear which one you're talking about. The names of parks could be like Ojibwe Park or name of a provincial park. Also, the names of natural landmarks, things like mountains, like Mount Everest, canyons, like the Grand Canyon, certain types of valleys and deserts. Not every single mountain gets a name, and neither does every single canyon, but some of them do, like major ones that are really big do. If it has a name, make sure the name has a capital letter on it. Okay, I'm gonna kind of flip over that. Oh, this is the one other thing that comes up. Um, Most of us do the majority of our writing on Facebook or Messenger. And it's really common there to use all sorts of short forms, slangs, emojis. That's fine. It's totally fine for Facebook because it's kind of a casual writing. Usually you're writing to a friend, but it's not really appropriate when you're doing kind of academic or what's called school phrases. So here are just a few examples of words and short forms that you wouldn't really use when you're writing to me. So things like LOL, he, OMG, WTH, JK, or emojis like little hearts or smiley faces. Um, some things are totally fine to write, but you would need to spell the whole thing. So like somebody had TBH, means to be honest. It's fine to write, to be honest, I didn't like school, but you can't just put the short form TBH. Same thing with the letter U for the word U, the number 4 for the word for, FR for real, IRL for in real life, FTR for the record, TY for thank you, YW for you're welcome, or NP for no problem. So all of those, you would just need to write the actual word out if you wanted to use it. I think that's kind of a good spot to stop. So again, you're going to do the rough copy and then do the good copy. This is only like our second assignment, so I don't, mark too strictly right now. I'm more just trying to get a chance to see what your writing is like and where you've lived and what you've done and just have a sense of who you are. I've got a lot of students and it does help if I have an essay to kind of picture the person in my mind. Thank you so much for coming out today. We have one more class this week tomorrow at the same time, and I look forward to talking to you guys then. Does anyone have any questions before I sign off? No, we're good. Okay, I'm going to end then.